Welcome to our second lecture for Econ 202 Macroeconomics. We're looking at Chapter 2, Choice in a World of Scarcity, and we're going to try and look at three basic things. How does economic reasoning interpret individuals' choices? We'll look at something called the production possibility frontier and the law of diminishing returns. That law of diminishing returns basically is that idea that the first dessert that you eat is delicious, the second one is fairly tasty, by the third one, maybe you're feeling a little ill, and the fourth one you don't even want. And then finally, looking at objections to economic approaches of decision making. So there's some problems with just an economic lens to decision making, and we'll look at what some of those issues might be. So when we talk about opportunity costs, which I mentioned last lecture, it's recognizing that when you choose to do one thing, if I choose to spend my paycheck on going out with friends, then I've given up alternative options of how to spend that money and that time. And one of them might have been getting some homework done in terms of time, but in terms of the money, it might have meant that I chose to give up buying a gift for my mom's birthday. And so ideally, we would make decisions that put our priorities first. But whenever we decide to spend a limited resource, time, money, talent on one thing, we give up doing something else, and the opportunity cost is the next best alternative. Sunk cost is once you have already made a purchase, it's hard to ever get that money back. And in a rational decision process, you wouldn't use that in the decision process anymore. So if I've already bought my car, it's already paid for. Then when I go out and I buy, I have to get it insured in order to drive it. I have to put gas in it for it to run. I don't, I shouldn't spend a lot of time thinking about whether or not I should pay for the car because I already own it. So individuals tend to consider a lot of their decisions, according to economists, based on the combinations of goods and their prices and what they could or what are their alternatives to buy with those resources that we all have in our families, in our personal accounts. I would say the same is true of businesses and nations. And a budget constraint just shows the combination of two goods that any person could consume given a fixed income, a set amount of money that they have or earn. And moving from one point to another just shows the opportunity cost. You're giving up buying one thing for another. And here's just an example of it. If there were only two things in the world to buy, bus tickets and burgers, it'd be a really boring world. But remember, again, these diagrams, these graphs are all about taking complex things and trying to make them a little more simple so we can talk about them. So if I bought all burgers, I could have 5 of them on my budget of $10, but I wouldn't be able to get any bus tickets. Because the price of bus tickets is cheaper, I could also spend all my money on bus tickets, point F, and then I would get 20 bus tickets, but no burgers. And then anywhere along that line are some other options, some trade-offs. I could get, 4 burgers and 4 bus tickets. So anywhere along that line is possible. And as I move from one point to another, that is me making decisions and weighing opportunity costs. The production possibility frontier is looking at all the goods and services, and we look at a national economy for the most part. So for the whole country, what could be produced given all our available resources, and how well are we doing to producing that amount? And we could be talking about resources that are natural, like land or labor. Or we could be talking about capital. We could be talking about a skill set, such as entrepreneurial skill or knowledge area. This is what a production uh, curve looks like. And along that, similar to the last slide, anywhere along it, we are maximizing the use of our resources. We could give it all to healthcare, all to education, or we could do some combination of it. And it's shaped not in a line, but curved like this because of some mathematics that tell us this is the shape that it must take. And so for the trade-offs, they're not a straight line, as in the last one, they're curved, and that's the reason for the curve. Anything under it, such as point R, would mean we're not quite doing as well as we could have as a total economy in maximizing the amount of healthcare and education we could provide. Occasionally, you'll see points outside of it when we get into more complex discussions. And I will just say one thing about that. If there's a point out here, generally what we do is we say that's not sustainable over a long period of time. We're using resources of tomorrow today, and we can't really exist outside or beyond this frontier for an indefinite period of time because of that. So when we think about countries, they can consume outside their PBF, like I said, when there's specialization, though, of trade. So once a country and another country decide to share resources to trade with one another, then David Ricardo's law of comparative advantage says we can actually move that frontier out further. We could move that curve to the right, and therefore we could have more of healthcare and education because we're trading with one another. We would grow both economies. But when we do that, there are actual losers. There are workers or businesses or industries in one of those countries that maybe are no longer able to produce because they've had to compete against the workers, the businesses, the industries of the other country. And so while the whole economic pie does grow, and all of us can benefit from lower prices and greater quantity of the goods. In this case, we are talking healthcare and education. Some people are hurt. Some businesses are hurt. Some industries within a country are hurt. And I will argue that even some countries can end up losing. The way I describe it is the pie gets bigger, but your slice, personal slice, might get smaller. And it's those trade-offs that make free trade and the debate about it and all of the protests kind of the reality that we experience. So in this simplified world, again, what we're looking at is just two countries. On the left, you've got Brazil. They're really good at making sugar, not as good at growing wheat, which is actually true because of their climate. Next, you have the USA, not as good at growing sugar, much better at growing wheat, also true because of our land mass and kind of our climate as well. And so it turns out that if Brazil will do more sugarcane production and we'll do more wheat production and we will trade with one another, we can both gain advantage from that. So behavioral economics is a small branch of economics, but it is a really important piece of economics that says people don't always act rational. Most economists operate with models, those kind of diagrams that we look at, assuming a high degree of rational decision making. But behavioral economics says when we look at psychology and the reality of humans, they make very irrational decisions, and at least at times, there's temporary inconsistency as a simple example. When people behave today in a way that they know they'll regret in the future, if you've ever yelled at someone you deeply care about, if you've ever mistreated someone or done something you've been ashamed of, you know this feeling. Anchoring is another concept, and it's when you base the value of something based on what you've heard recently. An example I use is I was trying to buy a painting in Haiti, one of the first international trips I took, and someone else on the trip had bought a painting for $4, and so I decided that's what I should be able to get a painting for. And I walked away from a painter 5 times before he sold me his painting for $4. We had started at 20, and I could see the look of defeat and almost tears in his eyes as I walked away. And I realized that for the price of $1 or $2, I had really devalued another human being. And the only reason I was trying to get that price is not because it was what the painting was worth, but it was because I knew what someone else had paid. So behavioral Economists then have a different kind of look, but other economists primarily look at financial costs and benefits, where behavioral economists believe that people use both financial and non-financial, like psychological, cognitive, emotional, relational, cultural, social factors, um, as well as cost and benefits, to do their cost and benefit analysis. How much is something worth to me? I may not address a conflict with someone I don't know because the relationship is not important enough to wade into that difficult conversation. But somebody I deeply love and care about, I'll wade into a more uncomfortable conversation with. So often people view economics as only thinking about money, but really good economics is the study of how we make choices. And all choices will involve opportunity costs, giving up other things in order to pursue that. When you pick a major, you by default select a lot of majors you will not pursue. And we're aware as economists that people, countries, businesses, organizations, ultimately those decisions are made by one or a group of individuals. The people are not always, don't always make the best choices. They don't always make what seems like the rational choice. We make we make choices informed with the information we have at that time. It's kind of a snapshot, a piece of history as best as we understood it. If we could make that same decision 2 days later with new information, we might change our decision. So, the activity for today is for you to think about what are the opportunity costs of getting a college degree? What did you give up in order to come to college? Since you're listening to this lecture, you're in this class, you're at college, how does attending um, class factor into that? But most importantly, I want you to tell me what was the cost of deciding to come to college, and then contrast that with someone who maybe didn't choose to come to college. What is the opportunity cost they gave up to enter the workforce, go to the military, to not pursue their education beyond high school? And then finally, you'll see a list there. I'm just curious, how did you decide not only that you're going to college, but what college you ended up coming to, in this case, Roberts Wesleyan? What were the factors that drove that decision? And you could just list them, or you could cut and paste this and circle it. So thanks for listening to lecture 2.